Good afternoon, Lily. Good evening, rather. I hope you can hear me and you can see the presentation. Can you see the presentation? Just give me a confirmation so that we begin the lecture. Okay. Okay. So let's begin today's lecture, which is, yeah. So today we actually are looking at the poetry segment. And so today we are looking at focusing on the intersection that we have of nature and culture, as we find it's reflected in the works of four prominent writers, poets that are syllabus. And it includes works by Shelley, Alfred Lord Tennyson, and Robert Browning, and one more, that is Matthew Arnold. So we will be looking at these poets. So we know about it that first thing that is to be understood about these poets is that these poets belong to different literary period. It's not that they are from one period or literary age in which they've been writing, and hence we find that there is an engagement in which how differently they are engaging with the thematic concern of nature and culture. So, we'll be looking at particular poems that are there in your syllabus, which includes Ozymandias, In Memoriam. Just give me 1 sec. So we'll be looking at how, In Memoriam is again another poem by there. Then Meeting at Night is another text that we will be discussing today. Then there'll be Dover, which we'll try to cover today. Okay, so these are the poems that reflect on how nature not only forms the backdrop for human fate, for the experience that is there used to depict metaphor for human ambition that is reflected in these poems, but also how nature culture segment is a part of the syllabus, because it reflects the changing human attitude that people have towards natural world and society. So let's begin the journey through the lens of one poet at a particular time. So let's begin by looking at the first poet. Where's your panda? Get your panda. Okay. So let's begin by talking about Shelley. Now, P.B. Shelley actually was a poet who was born in 1792, and he was one of the key figures of English Romantic movement. He was an idealist who actually um, was also a visionary, a passionate advocate for freedom of both the political and the spiritual aspects that are there. Wait. Now, we understand that Shelley's sensibilities have been, his imaginative concerns that have been there was very much shaped by nature, which we saw came alive and it was considered as a sacred thing that was there in his poems. He was constantly looking at the transformation as well. So his poetry is often considered to be revolutionary as well with this it is also talking about the concept of beauty that he has defined, his compassion that is there for humanity, which makes his work timeless. So this particular poem that you have in your syllabus is Ozymandias, where he's channeling the revolutionary spirit into a meditation on impermanence of human power that is there. Okay, before we move to the text of the poem, I would want to take you to briefly look at the age to which he belongs. So he belongs to Romantic age, which is roughly spanning from 1780 to 1830 as a time frame. And this particular age is can be marked, as a profound shift that took place in literature, in culture, because it was a reaction against the rationalism of enlightenment that was there in the previous age, which was 18th century. And you find that there was a mechanization of the industrial revolution, which was revolted by in certain ways in which the poetry changed eventually. So you had romantic poets like Wordsworth, Coleridge, Keats, and Shelley, who were celebrating the profoundness of emotions in human beings, the common man, the individuality of the common man, the sublime aspects of nature. Unlike the Industrial Revolution, which was trying to, look at monotonous life of people who were looking at the materialistic aspects of livelihood. So here we were suggested by these poets in through their works that how we should be more close to nature. And these people saw nature not as a mere resource, but also as a living force, which will reflect on the divine truth, and human imagination will be kindled through it. So the Romantics sought to rediscover the spiritual bond between man and nature, and they felt that this sort of connection was actually lost in the modern world. So I am giving you enough time to read. Right. So what I'm speaking to you is a lot different than what you have on the slide written for you. It will be nice if in case you can continue to read that as well in the segment of break that we'll have to take today. I am really apologetic about my daughter's noise today in the lecture, but yeah, hopefully we shall be able to sail through. So yes, that is all about romantic age that I wanted you to pay attention to. And then moving on, I'm trying to move to the next slide, which is Ozymandias. Please take out your time to look at the text and tell So look at the text of Ozymandias that is there in front of you. It is one of Shelley's most famous sonnets, firstly. So please count the number of lines that you have. And this was published in 1818. So let's look at the poem, that how it is a sonnet. It is a 14-line poem that is very clearly visible to us. And it is one of the very popular poems because it was published in 1818, and it describes the ruins of a colossal statue, which is like a huge statue which was lying desolate on a desert. And now this poem captures a meeting between the speaker and a traveler who recounts that there is a vision of a fallen monument. And this statue is a statue of a great king, Ozymandias, who was a great king whose arrogance and ambition, they have now been turned to dust. Okay, so this poem somewhere brings in the concept of mortality, that you might be some big shot in life, but your end is going to be as similar as that of a common man. So, through vivid imageries that are there in the poem and the powerful irony that you see, Shelley here is actually compressing centuries of human history into 14 lines. There's a king who has proud inscription, and the inscription on the statue says, "Look on my works, you mighty and despair. Now stands over empty sands." So the grandeur that he sought, that he wanted to immortalize himself as a being, had been swallowed. So that's one part of it that we get to see here. And so yeah, mortality, immortality, the commonality that is there. So yes, let's look at Ozymandias further. And yeah, so it was actually the grandeur that he thought that there'll be people who will be immortalized in time and nature. Actually, how it waits for none. And and the poem actually became a universal mediation, where people actually came together and thought about it, that what happens to human pride, what happens to the concept of mortality, and the futility of power, that once who was a king actually is also lying down and is dead and has converted into dust. So what I'm trying to tell you today is, in today's lecture, is we are not going into the details of the poem, but I'm just giving you the basic concept, and also um, looking at the vivid imagery that is there. Okay, We will discuss each and every aspect of the poem today, not today, but then eventually in the next lecture. So today is a basic introduction to the age and the author, and a little bit about the poems that we have in our syllabus. So now, if you look at the other aspects here, Ozymandias is not just about the fall of a king, actually, but it's also talking about the decay of human civilization altogether. You find that the statue that has been shattered, that is presented to you in the poem, it actually symbolizes the decline of the empires that are there, and not just one empire, like several empires that come and go by. And Shelley here is contrasting the very lifeless tone that is there with the living power of art and nature, that how art continues to survive. And while human ambition is fading, art and nature actually continues to live by for years, and it becomes timeless and it endures. It is preserving the truth of human vanity as well. So the poem structure that you look at, it is actually a sonnet which mirrors the classical form, but at the same time it is also conveying the moral irony that is there. And it's not conveying you any idea about romantic love, but it is conveying you the idea of mortality. So his choice of words that you find, look at the terms that he is using in the poem, like colossal wreck, boundless and bare. It conveys that there is emptiness, there is emphasis on nature's dominance over human achievement. You find that Ozymandias exemplifies romantic fascination that people have. Okay, so you have time, change, and sublime concepts that are reflected here. There is a feeling of mixed concept of sadness that is there, melancholy that is there, and you find that the power that people think that is their pride, there is more power in nature than the living being, human life. Okay, that is reflected here. So let's look at the next writer now, who is from Victorian age, and this writer is Alfred Lord Tennyson. Now, Alfred Lord Tennyson was actually born in the year 1809. Wait, yeah. So let's look at the poet firstly. He was born in 1809 and he was one of the greatest poets of Victorian age. He has also served as the Poet Laureate of England for more than 40 years, which is like a good number of years. And you find that during this period that he lived, he actually looked at scientific progress and moral uncertainty. And that's what is reflected even in his poems. So, if you look at it, he talks about industrial revolution. And he looks at industrial revolution and Darwin's concept of theory that Darwin has given, where he also looks at traditional faith, how the faith of people had begun to be questioned with the advent of scientific developments that were happening. And he lived during this period of scientific progress where people were not so sure about what being moral means, what being religious means, because religion itself was questioned around this time. And industrial revolution, so Tennyson's poetry reflects that there's a tension between science and religion as well, between faith and doubt. And his lyricism and emotional depth that you have actually is something that makes him a bridge between romantic literature and the Victorian sensibilities, because right after romantic age we have Victorian age. So you find that there is a good mix, that because he uses lyrical poetry, we find this connection established between the age. So let's learn a little bit about the Victorian age, what was happening in the Victorian age. This Victorian age actually stretches from 1830 to 1901. Okay. It was actually one era where you had a lot of progress that have been made. And if you look at it, it was also an age of paradox. So there was Britain's industrial and colonial expansion that was happening around this time, where Britishers were moving, and this movement of establishing colonies was bringing prosperity, but it was actually also increasing social inequality. Now, whenever you have social inequality, it will also be looking at spiritual doubts that people had. So there was a rise of science. There was Darwin's theory of origin of species had come into being, and a lot of challenges were further long held religious belief systems that people had. They were challenged because of science. People had begun to question whether God exists or not, because you cannot see God. And Victorian poets that were there, like Tennyson, Arnold, Browning, they were struggling to reconcile the faith that was there with the reason that people had. So it was reason versus faith. Okay. So then let's look at the poem In Memoriam. So Tennyson's poem In Memoriam is actually an elegy. So please go back home today and look at, revise the concept of elegy. What is an elegy? How it was written over 17 years. And this particular poem is actually chronicling poet's idea of emotional journey, how the poet is moving from despair to acceptance, because it is actually a poem that follows Hallam's death. The section that we are reading in the poem is actually beginning with "Be near me when my light is low." You can read the line "Be near me with when the light is low." So that is the segment where a speaker is yearning for comfort and faith in looking at life's ebbs away. The poem captures the very fact that how human life is such a short-lived life. So let's move further and look at how this poem particularly is looking at Tennyson's struggle, how there was a conflict between scientific discovery and religious belief. There is a question of divine justice that is asked because of faith and love that he had. So moving further, if you look at it, this particular poem is looking at fragility of human existence, how there is spiritual longing while people were still having doubts. And so you find that Tennyson is actually has written this long elegy And this is a poem which is actually reflecting on Victorian crisis of faith. People had no faith because they were looking at scientific development that were questioning the concept of God. And so the religious belief and scientific discoveries both are presented here. He questions the poem in the poem itself. He questions that what is the concept of divine justice, because ultimately you find solace in faith and love. So there is a imagery that is repeated again and again of nature, which is flies of later spring, wheels of being. These are two prominent imageries which serve that there is a reminder of how life constantly evolves, how life is a following a cyclic pattern, and whatever has come will be renewed as well. So there is grief that is there. Through grief, the poet is discovering that faith must evolve and faith should not vanish. So Tennyson's craftsmanship actually lies when you look at the musical language that he has used in the poem. So he uses a lot of literary figures of speeches like repetition. He uses emotional control as well, that is reflected in the poem. And you find that the poem is moving from darkness to light. So this is also another pattern that you find. This movement from darkness to light actually symbolizes that the poem is ending on an optimistic note. The poem is also symbolizing spiritual growth through suffering. So suffering is again another concept that is very important in British in Bible. Okay. The number you have dialed is currently later. So I would want you to look at the next writer. Next poet that we have is Robert Browning. And when we talk about Robert Browning, he is a person who had come up with dramatic monologue. Now, when we talk of dramatic monologue, it is a literary figure of speech that you had in your first semester. So Robert Browning actually he was born in 1812. He also wrote in Victorian age, where you find that Tennyson was introspective, he was also melancholic, but Browning had optimism and he was also robust. So he developed dramatic monologue as a poetic form, which actually revealed speakers' inner thoughts from, how it became a possibility of self-expression that was given out in the poem. So you find that his poems are exploring love, the concept of art, the very moral struggles that are there in a person. And unlike Shelley or Tennyson, Browning actually, so Browning was viewing life as a journey towards spiritual fulfillment rather than how it would lead to despair, that how life is something that should be gloomy, that should be sad. That was not his perspective. Okay. And yeah, I'm not repeating the age because it's the same age as Victorian age that we discussed in past. Now, when we talk about reading the poem Meeting at Night, this is the poem that you have in your syllabus, and it is one of Browning's most lyrical poems that you read. And like lyrical poem in the sense, because we know that lyrical poetry was written in romantic time, romantic age. And this poem particularly describes the secret journey through the land and sea to meet the beloved. So there is a lover who tries to go, and he walks a lot on the land on and travels through the sea to meet the beloved. And the landscape that is reflected here, the sea, the moon, various fields that are there, it reflects the intensity of human passion. And through this fusion of nature and love, you find that Robert Browning is capturing the vitality of human experience in itself. Every sound and color that you see in the poem, it actually contributes to the sense of anticipation that one has. So like you have yellow half moon, you have startled little wave, and the blue spot of lighted match, blue spot of a lighted match that is reflected here. So by the time the two lovers meet, you find that nature in itself is celebrated here. Okay, so that is where I would like you to observe these concepts of the joy, the pulse with which you find this poem. And this poem is actually ending up with an image of two. So the two hearts that are beating together, and that beating of two hearts actually becomes a perfect metaphor. Okay, and that's a perfect metaphor for emotional and spiritual union of the people. So I hope you've been able to look at the text and this particular poem. You can see the colors, the shades that have been mentioned here as well. Now, Meeting at the Night, let's also look at critical analysis. So when you look at the first aspect of Meeting at Night, you think that it is a love poem, but it is also a mediation on energy, on courage, and it's also talking about the fulfillment that one has. So the journey itself symbolizes that there is physical and emotional striving that is there. And Browning is celebrating love not as like a dreamy passion that is there, but it is actually a very purposeful action that is there in the poem. So the rhythm of the poem that you have, it actually mimics speaker's heartbeat. That quickens with the excitement that is there as he's approaching his goal. And unlike Shelley, who is actually talking about despair in the poem, Tennyson, who's talking about grief, here Browning is actually having a tone that is life affirming. So he presents love as a force that gives meaning to existence of people. He also looks at the concept of nature, which is not a passive being in the poem, but it is a dynamic, active being in the poem. So there is a partner in human experience that exists in the poem as a listener. And this vitalistic view that you have actually marks Browning as one of the most positive voices that you have in Victorian era. Okay, next that I want to cover up and introduce you to is the poet Matthew Arnold. Now, Matthew Arnold was born in 1822. He was both a poet and a cultural critic. He had written several essays as well. And he lived during a time when science and industrial progress actually were eroding the traditional faith. So Arnold's poetry actually expresses deep moral seriousness. It talks about intellectual reflection that that was called for. He saw poetry that it was a substitute for lost religion. And it was a way in which, according to him, he could restore the faith and harmony and in a very fragmented world, which was where people had begun to lose faith in everything. So his tone, particularly in the poems that he has written, is reflective. It is somewhere melancholic as well. You find the tone into nostalgia as well. So in the poem Dover Beach, which is prescribed in your syllabus, he's actually lamenting the loss of faith and certainty in the modern world. So its poetry stands at the threshold of romantic idealism and modern skepticism. When you read Dover Beach, the poem that is there in your syllabus, you find that there is a tranquil description, that there is sea described there, there is moonlight there, at moonlight coast that is reflected there. There's calmness of beauty of nature, which is contrasted with inner turmoil that the poet is having, the speaker of the poem is having. So there is calmness of nature as against the human being who's facing so much chaos within himself. And this poet hears in the grating roar that is there, in the pebbles and the senses of eternal note of sadness that is there in the poem. As the poem is unfolding, the sea itself becomes a metaphor for how one can actually have retreat of faith, one can revive faith. Once full, now the sea that was once full is actually receding back. So Arnold's voice is that way you find that it is both a personal voice and also a universal voice. And he calls upon love as only thing that is certainly that has certainty left. So love is the only thing that can revive one from chaotic and faithless world in which people have been living. There are closing line that you have in the poem as our love, let us be true to one another, offer a humanistic consolation. In the age that we have been living in, which is age of doubt. So we find that Arnold as a speaker in the poem has a voice which is both personal and also universal. And he calls upon love as the only certainty left. Okay. So Dover Beach particularly is actually a poem that captures the essence of Victorian poetry, Victorian sense of disillusionment as well. And the poem is shifting from calm observation to despair. It also mirrors the loss of spirituality, loss of stability that people had. So people are talking about sea of faith. People who were once surrounded in the world, who were are protective, in a world which was actually a protective tide, are now withdrawing, and now their humanity is being exposed. So Arnold is using sound, rhythm, imagery to give you a natural seascape in the poem, which is also a way of including philosophical reflection of human life. The poem is ending at pessimistic note, not at a very optimistic note. So that's one thing that is a bit different here, and it's questioning moral integrity of people, emotional truth and values that have been there. Okay, so today I have just tried to focus on nature, culture, and the human condition that's been reflected in all these poems that have been there. In the next class, we will look at all these poems in greater length. Okay. And if possible, I shall try and share the presentation in the class group as well. Do you have any questions?
Yeah.
No questions so far? Okay. Suman, how are you?
Good evening, ma'am. I'm fine. What about you?
How are you doing, Suman?
I'm doing very well, ma'am. Tell me about you.
I've been fine. Could you hear me earlier while I was delivering the lecture?
Yes, ma'am. Voice was very clear.
Okay, okay. Yeah, okay. I'll try and share recordings of the lectures as well, if in case I get time. I'm intending to record some lectures for you people. You're able to understand the lectures?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, okay. Do you still go to the campus for classes?
Yes, I do.
Okay, fine. All right, Suman, I'll see you in the next class then.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, welcome, welcome.